My father looked straight at me and said I had 1 hour to leave his house. He did not raise his voice. He did not hesitate. He simply decided that my life no longer belonged there. My mother stayed silent, staring at her plate, as if looking away could erase what was happening. In 60 minutes, I stopped being a daughter and became a mistake he wanted removed. 9 years later, my security team called to tell me there was an older couple at my gate. They said they were my parents. I smiled, not because I missed them, but because the girl they discarded at 18 had built something they now needed permission to enter. This story is not about rejection. It is about what happens after you refuse to disappear. Before everything broke, I was the kind of girl people described as sensible, quiet, reliable, the one who followed rules even when no one was watching. I did not sneak out. I did not cause trouble. I believed that if I stayed in line, life would stay stable. I was 18, still trying to figure out who I was allowed to be. My days revolved around school, part-time work, and a future I imagined would unfold slowly and safely. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just steady progress and a little peace at the end of it. That felt fair to me. At home I knew my place. I kept my opinions measured and my emotions controlled. I learned early that approval was something you earned, not something you received freely. So I earned it the only way I knew how, by being agreeable, responsible, and easy to manage. People around me assumed I was fine. I looked fine. I acted fine. I played the role well. On the surface, my life seemed pretty normal, maybe even a bit boring. And honestly, I was okay with that. Boring felt safe. What no one saw was how much effort it took to stay that way. Every decision passed through an invisible filter in my head. Would this disappoint him? Would this cause tension? Would this change how I was seen? I learned to think ahead, to shrink certain parts of myself, to stay quiet when speaking felt risky. I told myself this was maturity. I told myself everyone lived like this. I had plans even if they were small. Finish school. Save some money. Eventually move out on my own terms. I believed my future was something I could control if I stayed careful enough. Looking back, that version of me feels almost fragile. Not weak, just unprepared. I did not know how quickly stability could vanish. I did not know how little control I truly had over the people I trusted most. And I definitely did not know that the life I worked so hard to protect was already balancing on the edge of something I could not see coming. Control shaped my childhood long before I had words for it. My father believed structure was the same thing as love, and silence was proof of discipline. He did not yell often. He did not need to. His expectations filled every room he walked into. Rules were clear and rarely explained. Questions were unnecessary. Obedience was assumed. I learned quickly that the safest version of myself was the quiet one. The version that listened more than she spoke. The version that never pushed back. Affection was scarce, but approval was conditional. It appeared briefly when I did something right and disappeared just as fast if I failed. Praise never lingered. It felt borrowed, not owned. I became good at chasing it without asking for it. My mother lived in the same house, but on a different emotional plane. She was present in body, absent in every way that mattered. She did not argue. She did not intervene. She moved through our home carefully, as if disturbing the peace would cost her something she could not afford to lose. Silence became our shared language. At dinner, conversations stayed shallow. At milestones, celebrations were muted. Achievements were acknowledged with nods instead of pride. I learned not to expect comfort, only structure. Not warmth, only order. I adapted because children always do. I adjusted my tone. I monitored my reactions. I trained myself to stay calm even when I felt small. Over time, that control worked its way inside me. I started policing my own emotions before anyone else had the chance to. From the outside, we looked functional, respectable, stable. People assumed I was lucky to grow up in a home without chaos. They did not see that silence can be just as loud as conflict. What I did not understand then was how much that environment shaped my fear of failure. I was not afraid of making mistakes. I was afraid of what mistakes meant in a house where love felt earned and easily revoked. That kind of upbringing teaches you one dangerous lesson. You start believing that being accepted is the same thing as being safe. And that belief was about to cost me everything. Approval became my currency before I even understood its value. In a house where affection was scarce, Validation felt like oxygen. I learned to recognize it in small doses, a nod from my father, a moment of neutrality instead of criticism, silence that did not feel heavy. Those moments mattered more than they should have. I told myself I wanted their approval because it was normal. Parents were supposed to care. Children were supposed to try. That sounded reasonable enough. What I did not admit, even to myself, was how deeply I tied my sense of worth to their reactions. Every choice I made carried an invisible audience. I dressed carefully. I spoke cautiously. I planned my future around what would sound acceptable rather than what felt right. If something went wrong, my first instinct was not disappointment in myself. It was fear of how they would see me afterward. My father's expectations sat in the back of my mind at all times. He rarely said he was proud, but I chased that possibility anyway. I believed that if I reached a certain standard, he would soften. If I stayed responsible enough, quiet enough, predictable enough, I would finally be safe. My mother's silence added another layer. She never confirmed or denied my efforts. She just watched. That absence made me work harder, not less. I wanted proof that I mattered enough to be defended, noticed, chosen. Instead, I learned to settle for not being a problem. Over time, that need turned inward. I stopped asking what I wanted. I focused on what would be approved. I trained myself to anticipate disappointment before it arrived. That way, when it did, it hurt a little less. People called me mature for my age. I accepted the compliment without realizing it came at a cost. I was not mature. I was careful. I was managing expectations instead of exploring life. The truth is simple and uncomfortable. I needed their approval because I believed it would protect me. I thought being accepted meant being secure. I thought staying within their rules meant nothing truly bad could happen. I did not know that approval can disappear faster than love ever arrives. And when it did, I had no idea who I was without it. Safety to me looked quiet. It looked predictable. It looked like a life that never drew attention to itself. I believed I had built that kind of life piece by careful piece. Nothing dramatic. Nothing risky. Just enough structure to feel steady. My days followed a routine that felt solid. School during the week. Part-time work when I could fit it in. Evenings at home where I kept to myself and stayed out of the way. I knew which conversations to avoid and which opinions to keep unspoken. That awareness felt like control. From the outside, everything appeared fine. There were no loud arguments. No obvious chaos. People assumed I was doing well, maybe even lucky. I let them believe that. It was easier than explaining the constant pressure of staying acceptable. I told myself that if I kept things balanced, nothing could collapse all at once. I believed life rewarded consistency. I believed stability was something you earned by being careful enough for long enough. There were plans, modest ones, but plans all the same. Finish school. Save money. Move out when the timing felt right. Start fresh without burning bridges. I imagined independence arriving slowly, on my terms, without conflict or fallout. I even convinced myself that silence at home meant peace. That distance meant respect. That not being questioned meant I was trusted. Looking back, those assumptions feel fragile, like glass mistaken for steel. The truth is, my life was not safe. It was suspended. It depended entirely on me never stepping out of line, never making a mistake that could not be ignored. That kind of safety is temporary, even when it feels solid. What I did not realize was how narrow the margin really was. How little room there was for error. How quickly everything could change once I crossed a line I did not even know existed. I thought I was standing on stable ground. I was actually standing on a trapdoor. The truth arrived quietly, without drama or warning. No explosion. No scene. Just a moment that shifted the air in my lungs and made everything else feel distant. I remember sitting alone, staring at something I could not stop looking at, knowing my life had just split into a before and an after. At first, my mind refused to accept it. I checked again, then again, hoping logic would override reality. It did not. The truth stayed exactly where it was, calm and unmoving, while my thoughts raced in every direction at once. Fear came next. Not panic, not yet. A heavy awareness that pressed down on my chest. I thought about my parents. I thought about the rules I had followed. I thought about how carefully I had built my life to avoid exactly this kind of moment. Questions flooded in faster than I could answer them. What would they say? What would happen to my plans? How long could I keep this to myself? Every possibility felt dangerous in its own way. I told myself to slow down, to breathe, to think. I promised myself I would handle it responsibly, quietly, the way I handled everything else. I believed that if I stayed calm enough, I could control the outcome. But control was already slipping. I started measuring time differently. Days felt shorter. Nights stretched on too long. Every sound in the house made me tense, as if the walls themselves might expose me. I began rehearsing conversations in my head, editing them over and over, searching for the version that would hurt the least. Part of me hoped this truth could stay hidden long enough for me to figure things out. Another part of me knew that secrets like this do not stay quiet forever. They grow. They demand space. What scared me most was not the truth itself. It was what it represented. It meant I had crossed a line I was never supposed to approach. It meant the life I thought was safe was no longer protected by silence or obedience. It meant I would have to face the people whose approval I depended on, with something they would never accept. I did not know it yet, but this truth was already setting events in motion. And once it started, there was no way to stop what came next. And it was already starting to give way. Keeping the secret became my full-time job. I learned how to move through the house without drawing attention, how to control my expressions, how to answer questions without giving anything away. Every smile felt practiced. Every conversation felt like a test I could fail at any moment. Fear settled into my body in quiet ways. It showed up in my shoulders, always tense. It showed up in my sleep, which came in short, restless bursts. I woke up every morning already on edge, bracing for a confrontation that had not happened yet but felt inevitable. I tracked time obsessively. Days, weeks, small changes I hoped no one would notice. I chose clothes carefully, favoring layers and loose shapes, telling myself it was just a style choice. I avoided mirrors when I could. When I could not, I looked quickly, like someone checking for damage. At home, silence felt louder than ever. My father's presence filled rooms without a word. My mother's quiet movements made my chest tighten. I started reading meaning into every glance, every pause, every shift in tone. Paranoia became a habit. I rehearsed explanations constantly. I practiced saying the truth out loud when no one was around, adjusting my voice, softening words, trying to make it sound reasonable. Nothing ever did. Every version ended the same way in my head, with disappointment, anger, and doors closing. Outside the house, I acted normal. I went to school. I showed up to work. I nodded at jokes I did not hear and conversations I could not focus on. People told me I looked tired. I laughed it off and blamed stress. That excuse worked better than I expected. What I did not realize was how much the fear was changing me. I became smaller, quieter, more cautious than ever. I stopped thinking about the future and focused only on getting through the day without being exposed. The secret did not feel like something I carried anymore. It felt like something that carried me, dragging me forward toward a moment I could no longer avoid. I was counting down without knowing the number. And every day that passed made the truth heavier, not lighter. The conversation did not arrive suddenly. It crept closer with every passing day, sitting at the back of my mind like a deadline I could not miss. I knew it was coming. I just did not know when I would finally lose the ability to avoid it. I picked the moment carefully, or at least I thought I did. A quiet evening. No guests. No distractions. The house felt still, almost cooperative, as if it were giving me one last chance to speak before everything changed. My hands would not stop shaking. I stood there rehearsing my opening line, then abandoning it, then starting again. Every version sounded wrong. Too honest. Too weak. Too dangerous. My heart was racing so hard it felt like it might give me away before I said a single word. My father was seated, focused on something in front of him, calm and unreadable. My mother moved around the room quietly, placing things down that did not need to be moved. The normalcy of it all made my throat tighten. Part of me wanted to protect that calm, even though it was already fragile. I cleared my throat. The sound felt too loud. For a brief second, no one looked up. That silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Then my father turned toward me, his expression neutral, expectant. That look alone nearly made me step back. This was it. There would be no undoing this moment. I began speaking slowly, choosing each word with care, trying to keep my voice steady. I did not rush. I did not dramatize. I told myself that if I stayed calm, maybe they would stay calm too. That thought gave me a small, foolish sense of control. My mother froze where she stood. My father listened without interrupting, his face giving nothing away. That scared me more than anger ever could. I kept talking because stopping felt worse. Every sentence felt heavier than the last, as if the room itself were resisting the truth. When I finally finished, the air felt different. Thinner. Sharper. No one spoke right away. The silence that followed was not the same as before. This silence carried judgment. And in that moment I understood something with absolute clarity. The conversation I feared was not about what I had said. It was about what was about to be decided. The shift was immediate. It did not arrive with raised voices or slammed doors. It arrived in my father's eyes, where warmth drained away and something hard took its place. The room felt colder, even though nothing else had changed. He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time, and already deciding he did not like what he saw. My mother stayed frozen, her hands resting on the counter, her face carefully blank. She did not ask a question. She did not reach for me. She did not do anything at all. That absence hurt more than words ever could. My father spoke slowly, each sentence measured. He talked about expectations. He talked about responsibility. He talked about consequences. His tone was controlled, almost professional, like this was a problem he intended to solve efficiently. There was no concern for how I felt. No curiosity about what I needed. No acknowledgement that I was scared. I listened as he reduced my life to a list of failures, each one presented as evidence of disappointment, rather than a moment of vulnerability. I tried to explain. I kept my voice steady. I reminded him that I was still the same person I had been the day before. That effort did not matter. The conclusion had already been reached. My mother finally moved, but only to sit down. She kept her eyes on the table, nodding slightly at things he said, as if agreement were easier than conflict. Her silence felt like a quiet endorsement. That was the moment love changed its shape. It did not disappear loudly. It withdrew. It closed ranks. It turned conditional in a way I could finally see. I realized that what I had called love was actually approval, and approval could be taken away the second I stopped fitting the rules. My father finished speaking and waited, as if expecting a response. I had nothing left to give him. Every word I had prepared felt useless now. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was different. This silence did not invite conversation. It delivered a verdict. And I knew, without being told, that whatever came next would not include mercy. He did not raise his voice when he said it. That detail stayed with me longer than the words themselves. Anger would have been easier to understand. What came instead was something colder, something deliberate. He stood up slowly, as if giving himself space to speak clearly, and looked directly at me. There was no hesitation, no doubt, just resolve. He said I was a mistake, not a bad decision, not a disappointment, a mistake from his past that had finally revealed its true cost. He said he had spent years trying to turn me into something useful, something respectable, and I had undone all of it with one reckless choice. Each sentence landed with precision. There was no rush, no emotion to interrupt the delivery. It felt like he wanted me to remember every word. My chest tightened. My ears rang. I focused on staying upright because my legs no longer felt reliable. I searched his face for any sign of regret, any hint that he might stop himself. Nothing came. He told me I had embarrassed him, that I had ruined his plans, that the life he envisioned no longer included me. He spoke about reputation, about consequences, about how problems like this needed to be removed before they spread. I looked at my mother. She did not look back. That was when the weight of it finally broke through. Not just his words, but her silence sitting beside them. Together they formed something final, something irreversible. He told me to pack my things. He gave me a time limit, spoken as calmly as everything else. 1 hour. No exceptions. No discussion. He said it like a business decision already made, already justified. I wanted to argue. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream that I was still his daughter. None of it came out. The words stayed locked inside my throat, useless and heavy. In that moment I understood something I had never allowed myself to see before. Love that depends on conditions is not love. And the people who can erase you that quickly were never planning to protect you. The sentence ended. The decision stood. And whatever I had been before that moment ceased to exist. The hour passed faster than time ever had before. Every minute felt sharp, measured, unforgiving. I moved through my room like a stranger, opening drawers, closing them again, trying to decide which pieces of my life were worth carrying, and which would be left behind without ceremony. 2 suitcases sat open on the bed. They looked smaller than I remembered. I grabbed clothes first, not because they mattered most, but because they were easiest. Shirts folded without thought. Jeans stuffed wherever they fit. My hands worked automatically while my mind lagged behind, still struggling to accept that this was real. Down the hall, the television turned on. The sound drifted into my room, bright and cheerful, completely disconnected from what was happening upstairs. A laugh track played while I packed my life into corners and compartments. That contrast burned itself into my memory. No one came to help. No one knocked. No one asked if I needed anything. The house I had lived in my entire life felt suddenly occupied by people who did not know me at all. The walls watched. The door waited. I left behind more than I took. Childhood keepsakes. Photos. Things I had assumed would always be there. I did not have time to decide what mattered emotionally. I only had time to decide what I could carry physically. When the hour ended, I stood in the hallway with my bags at my feet. My father did not look up. My mother remained seated, hands folded, eyes fixed somewhere just beyond me. I waited for a final word that never came. The front door opened easily. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. The house behind me stood quiet and unchanged, as if nothing significant had happened within its walls. I stepped forward because staying was no longer an option. The door closed. That sound was soft, controlled, final. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, staring at the place I had just been erased from. Everything I had known was behind me. Everything I feared was ahead. I had no plan, no safety net, no idea where I was going. All I had were 2 suitcases, a truth no one wanted, and the sudden understanding that survival was no longer optional. And that was only the beginning. The first night away from that house did not feel real. It felt like I had stepped into someone else's life by mistake and could not find my way back. I sat in my car for a long time, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing in particular, trying to decide where a person goes when they no longer belong anywhere. I counted my money twice, hoping the numbers would change if I looked at them long enough. They did not. What I had was not enough for comfort, not enough for security, barely enough for the next few days. Every plan I had ever made assumed a safety net that no longer existed. I found a place that night because I had to. It was small, temporary, and forgettable, which somehow felt fitting. The room smelled unfamiliar. The bed creaked when I sat down. I left my suitcases closed because unpacking would have made it feel permanent, and I was not ready for that. Silence followed me there too, but it felt different. There were no expectations attached to it. No rules. Just space and the weight of my own thoughts. That weight was crushing. I cried quietly, not because I wanted to, but because my body finally stopped holding everything together. Tears came without permission. Fear came right after. Fear about money. Fear about the future. Fear about what I had just lost and what I was about to face alone. The word broke took on a new meaning. I was financially broke, counting every dollar. I was emotionally broken, replaying his words over and over, wondering how someone could erase me so completely. And beneath all of that, I was physically exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. Morning arrived too quickly. I woke up with a heaviness in my chest and a decision I did not remember making. There was no one coming to save me. No apology on the way. No door reopening behind me. I was alone. Truly alone. And as terrifying as that realization was, it carried something else with it. Something small and unfamiliar. Responsibility. From that moment on, everything depended on me. Rock bottom did not announce itself with drama. It arrived quietly, in moments no one else witnessed and no one would ever applaud. It showed up in empty rooms, in late nights, in the spaces between decisions where fear had room to breathe. There were mornings when getting out of bed felt optional, and I hated myself for even considering staying there. I learned how long a day could stretch when there was nothing to look forward to and no one checking in. Time became something I endured rather than lived. I counted money constantly, not for savings but for survival. Groceries became calculations. Gas became a question mark. Every purchase carried guilt, even the necessary ones. I learned how to say no to myself before anyone else had the chance. Some days I walked longer routes just to avoid running into people I might recognize. I did not want pity. I did not want questions. I did not want to explain how quickly a life could unravel. It was easier to disappear quietly. The emotional weight was relentless. His words replayed without warning, usually at the worst possible times. In the middle of work. Late at night. In the silence just before sleep. I tried to drown them out, but they always found a way back in. There were moments when doubt crept close enough to feel dangerous. Moments when I questioned whether I was strong enough to keep going, or if walking away that night had been a mistake. I never said those thoughts out loud. I did not trust them to leave once spoken. What saved me, oddly enough, was routine. Small, unremarkable actions repeated daily. Waking up. Showing up. Doing what needed to be done even when I felt empty. Survival became mechanical, and that kept me moving forward. No one saw those moments. There were no witnesses, no encouragement, no reassurance that it would be worth it. I carried everything alone, believing that if I slowed down, the weight might finally crush me. But somewhere in those unseen moments something shifted. I stopped waiting for permission to exist. I stopped hoping someone would fix this for me. Rock bottom did not break me. It stripped me down to what I could not lose. And that realization quietly changed the direction of everything that followed. Nightfall was when everything I managed to control during the day came apart. Darkness removed distractions. Silence amplified thoughts. Lying still gave my mind permission to revisit every word, every look, every decision that led me there. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it never stayed. I woke up often, heart racing, convinced I had missed something important or forgotten a step that would cost me everything. My body was exhausted, but my thoughts refused to slow down. I stared at the ceiling more nights than I slept. Questions looped endlessly. How long could I keep this up? What if I ran out of money? What if I failed? Each question arrived without an answer and left behind a deeper sense of unease. Fear took on a physical form at night. It sat heavy in my chest. It tightened my throat. It made every small sound feel like a warning. During the day I could pretend I was coping. At night, there was nowhere to hide from how fragile everything felt. There were moments when doubt pressed too close. Moments when the idea of giving up seemed less frightening than the idea of continuing. I hated those thoughts. I fought them silently, afraid that acknowledging them might give them power. What pulled me back every time was responsibility. Even when I felt empty, I knew I could not stop. Too much depended on me now. My choices. My effort. My ability to keep moving forward, even when nothing felt certain. I began talking to myself in the dark, quietly, as if I were trying to convince someone else to stay. I reminded myself of small victories. Of days I had survived that felt impossible when they began. Of the fact that I was still standing even when it did not feel impressive. Those nights changed me. They forced me to confront my limits and then push past them anyway. They stripped away illusions and replaced them with something harder and more honest. I did not come out of those nights fearless. I came out determined. And that determination was the first real strength I ever owned. The decision did not arrive with confidence. It arrived with exhaustion. One quiet morning after another night without rest, I realized something had to shift or I would not last much longer. Survival on autopilot was no longer enough. I sat alone, staring at the wall, and asked myself a question I had avoided for weeks. What was I actually trying to protect? The version of my life that had already rejected me, or the future that still had a chance to exist? That was the moment everything turned. I decided I would stop shrinking to make others comfortable. I would stop organizing my life around fear. I would stop waiting for approval that was never coming. That decision did not erase my problems, but it gave them direction. For the first time, I allowed myself to think beyond the next few days. Not in grand fantasies but in practical steps. Work that could grow. Skills that mattered. Choices that belonged to me, not to the expectations of people who had already walked away. I stopped apologizing to myself for wanting more. That shift changed how I moved through the world. I stood a little straighter. I spoke more clearly. I stopped explaining myself when explanations were not owed. It was subtle, but it mattered. People noticed when I did not expect them to. Fear was still there. It did not vanish overnight, but it stopped driving. I made space for it without letting it decide everything. That felt new. That felt powerful. I began saying yes to effort and no to excuses. I took work seriously even when it was unglamorous. I learned fast. I listened closely. I paid attention to how things actually worked instead of how I wished they did. Progress was slow, but it was real. There was no dramatic announcement. No promise of instant success. Just a quiet commitment I made to myself and refused to break. I did not know where it would lead yet. What I did know was this. I was done reacting. From that moment on, I would be building. And once that started, nothing stayed the same for long. Struggle became my routine, but belief did not come with it. I worked hard, showed up on time, did everything I was supposed to do, and still felt invisible. There was no encouragement waiting at the end of my effort. No one checking in to see if I was okay. Just long days and longer nights. People around me saw a young woman trying to hold things together and quietly assumed I would fail. They did not say it out loud, but I felt it in the way conversations ended too quickly, in the way opportunities stopped just short of reaching me. Doubt followed me everywhere, even when I did my best to ignore it. I took work wherever I could find it. Some days were exhausting in a physical way. Others drained me emotionally. None of it felt glamorous. It was just survival dressed up as responsibility. I learned how to keep moving even when motivation ran out. Mistakes happened. I made wrong choices. I trusted people I should not have. I underestimated myself and overestimated situations more than once. Each misstep felt heavier without support, like there was no margin for error. What hurt most was how alone the effort felt. I wanted someone to say they believed in me, even once. I wanted proof that this struggle had meaning beyond exhaustion. That reassurance never came. So I learned to work without it. I stopped waiting for validation and focused on consistency instead. Show up. Learn. Improve. Repeat. That rhythm carried me through moments when confidence disappeared entirely. I reminded myself that progress did not require applause. There were days when giving up felt tempting, especially when nothing seemed to change. But quitting felt worse. Quitting would have proven every silent doubt right. I refused to give that satisfaction to anyone, including the voice in my own head. Slowly something shifted. Not externally. Internally. I stopped measuring my worth by who believed in me and started measuring it by how far I kept going despite the doubt. That change did not make things easier. It made them possible. And even though no one believed in me at the time, I was laying the foundation for a life that would one day make belief irrelevant. Strength did not arrive all at once. It built itself quietly through repetition, patience, and a steady grind that rarely felt rewarding in the moment. I did not wake up one day feeling powerful. I woke up many days feeling tired, and I kept going anyway. Small changes began to add up. I noticed how problems that once overwhelmed me now felt manageable. Situations that used to trigger panic started to feel familiar. I was learning not just skills but myself. How I reacted under pressure. How I recovered after setbacks. How I adapted when plans fell apart. I stopped introducing myself as someone who had been hurt. I started acting like someone who was learning. That shift mattered more than I expected. It changed how people treated me and how I treated myself. Confidence followed action, not the other way around. There were moments when my past tried to pull me backward. A comment. A memory. A tone of voice that sounded too familiar. Each time I felt the old fear rise then fade. It no longer controlled me. It reminded me of how far I had already come. I built routines that supported me instead of draining me. I invested in learning things that gave me leverage. I paid attention to patterns, especially my own. What helped? What hurt? What was worth repeating? Growth stopped being accidental and became intentional. People began to notice, though not all at once. Trust appeared slowly. Responsibility followed. Opportunities opened in small, unglamorous ways. I took them seriously. I did not rush. I did not brag. I focused on doing the work properly. For the first time, my past stopped feeling like a weight and started feeling like proof. Proof that I could endure. Proof that I could rebuild. Proof that I did not need permission to become someone new. I realized something important along the way. The strongest version of me was not the one who survived rejection. It was the one who stopped letting rejection define her limits. I was no longer reacting to what had been done to me. I was shaping what came next. And what came next would require even more strength than anything before it. The life I built did not look impressive at first. It looked ordinary. It looked like long hours, careful choices, and progress so slow that only I could see it. That was fine by me. I was not chasing applause. I was chasing stability. Piece by piece, things started to line up. Not perfectly, but solid enough to stand on. I learned how to manage money without panic. I learned which skills actually mattered and which ones only sounded good on paper. I stopped wasting energy on people who offered opinions without effort. That alone changed everything. There was a quiet confidence that came with independence. Paying my own bills. Making my own decisions. Solving my own problems. None of it felt dramatic, but it felt earned. For the first time, my life belonged to me in a way it never had before. Opportunities showed up gradually. A better role. More responsibility. People trusting me with things that mattered. I handled each one carefully, knowing how quickly it could all disappear if I took it for granted. I did the work properly even when no one was watching. Success did not arrive with fireworks. It arrived with consistency. With routines that worked. With habits that held up under pressure. I built something reliable, something that did not depend on anyone else's approval to exist. That was the part no one expected. The girl they dismissed did not spiral. She did not beg. She did not come back asking for forgiveness. She focused. She adapted. She grew. And she did it quietly, without needing to announce every win. I started to enjoy the simplicity of that. No drama. No proving points. Just progress that spoke for itself. Life felt lighter when I stopped measuring it against the past. Looking back, I understand why they never saw it coming. They believed control was power. They believed silence was strength. They believed removing me would erase the problem. They were wrong. I built a life that did not need their permission, their validation, or their presence. A life that stood on effort, clarity, and self-respect. And even though they did not know it yet, everything I had built was about to force a reckoning they never prepared for. The past did not return with apologies or humility. It returned cautiously, almost nervously, as if unsure whether it was welcome. By then, my life had settled into a rhythm that felt steady and earned. I had stopped looking over my shoulder. I had stopped expecting anything from the people I left behind. That was when I heard their names again. At first, it came through indirect channels. Someone mentioned trouble. Someone else hinted at changes. Pieces of information surfaced slowly, each one connecting back to the same place I had walked away from years earlier. I listened without reacting, surprised by how little emotion it stirred. Then one afternoon the call came. I was in the middle of my day, focused and calm, when my phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize. The voice on the other end was polite, careful, and formal. They asked if I was available. They asked if I would be willing to talk. They did not say why at first. When they finally did, everything clicked. The people who once decided I was expendable were now looking for answers. Not explanations. Not closure. Answers. The kind that come when circumstances shift and pride can no longer protect you. I felt the old tension rise for a moment, then fade just as quickly. I realized I was not afraid. I was not angry. I was simply aware. Aware of how much had changed. Aware of where the power now rested. I did not respond right away. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. I needed time to decide what access I was willing to give and what boundaries I would not bend. That choice mattered more than any conversation. For years, I had carried the weight of what they thought of me. Now they were the ones reaching out, uncertain, cautious, unsure of where they stood. The reversal felt surreal. Not satisfying in the way I once imagined, but undeniable. I understood something then. The past was not returning to reclaim me. It was returning because it had run out of answers on its own. And whatever came next would be decided on my terms, not theirs. For the first time, that distinction mattered more than any explanation they could offer. Revenge did not look the way I once imagined it would. There was no confrontation rehearsed in my head. No dramatic speech. No raised voices. By the time the moment arrived, I no longer needed any of that. The calm came first. When we finally spoke, I listened more than I talked. I let them explain. I let them circle around the past without ever truly touching it. Their words carried urgency now, layered with concern they never showed when it mattered. I noticed how carefully they chose their tone, how unsure they sounded. I did not interrupt. What surprised me most was how little satisfaction I felt. I had spent years thinking this moment would feel heavy or victorious. Instead, it felt clear. Clean. Like standing on solid ground after a long storm. They spoke about regret. About misunderstanding. About family. I heard all of it without reacting the way my younger self would have. There was no rush to defend myself. No need to explain how wrong they had been. My life already did that quietly without effort. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I acknowledged the past without reopening it. I stated my boundaries without apologizing for them. I made it clear what was possible and what was not. There was no anger in my voice, only certainty. That certainty unsettled them more than anger ever could. I did not offer what they hoped for. I did not punish them either. I chose distance, clarity, and self-respect. I chose to protect what I had built instead of reopening doors that once led to collapse. That was the revenge they never expected. Not destruction. Not humiliation. Indifference rooted in peace. The kind that comes from no longer needing validation or resolution from the people who failed you. As the conversation ended, I felt lighter. Not because I had won, but because I had nothing left to prove. The past no longer held leverage over my present. I walked away without looking back, knowing something important had shifted permanently. They had come seeking answers. What they found instead was finality. And that was more powerful than anything I could have said. This journey taught me that strength is not loud. It does not announce itself. It shows up quietly, in the moments when no one is watching, and quitting would be easier than continuing. Real strength is built slowly, through choices that feel small at the time but change everything over the long run. I learned that approval is not the same as love. Love does not disappear the moment you make a mistake. Love does not require perfection to remain. When acceptance is conditional, it is fragile by design. Depending on it means living one decision away from losing everything. I also learned that silence can be just as damaging as cruelty. Words can wound, but inaction teaches its own lessons. Being ignored when you need protection reshapes how you see yourself, often in ways you do not notice until much later. Healing begins when you stop excusing that silence. This journey showed me that independence is not about pride. It is about safety. About building a life that does not collapse because someone else withdraws support. Self-reliance is not a rejection of connection. It is a refusal to be controlled by fear. I learned that pain does not automatically make you stronger. What makes you stronger is what you do with it. You can let it harden you, or you can let it clarify what matters. Growth comes from choosing clarity over bitterness. Most importantly, I learned that your past does not get to decide your limits. Being rejected does not make you disposable. Being abandoned does not make you unworthy. It simply reveals who was never equipped to protect you in the first place. The life I built did not come from revenge. It came from responsibility. From refusing to disappear. From choosing progress when resentment would have been easier. If there is one lesson worth carrying forward, it is this. You do not need permission to rebuild yourself. And sometimes the most powerful response to being thrown away is living well enough that the past no longer has a place in your future. This is where my story pauses, but the question stays open. I often think about how different everything could have been if I had made even one different choice. If I had begged. If I had gone back. If I had tried harder to be accepted by people who had already decided I was expendable. It would have been easier in the moment. It also would have changed everything. Not everyone is given support when they need it most. Not everyone is believed in. And not everyone gets a second chance wrapped in kindness. Sometimes all you get is a door closing and the responsibility to decide what comes next. I chose to keep going. I chose to build instead of breaking. I chose to protect my peace instead of chasing apologies. That choice did not come from strength at first. It came from necessity. Strength followed later. Now I want to ask you something honestly. If you were 18 facing rejection from the people who were supposed to protect you, what would you have done? Would you have fought for approval? Would you have walked away? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have rebuilt your life on your own terms? There is no perfect answer. Every situation is different, but sharing your perspective matters more than you might think. Someone reading this might be standing at their own breaking point right now, wondering if they are capable of surviving it. If this story resonated with you, tell me where you are watching from. Share your experience in the comments if you feel comfortable. Even a few words can remind someone else that they are not alone. Sometimes the most unexpected strength comes from realizing that your story does not end where someone else decided it should. And whatever choice you would have made, it deserves to be heard.